Good evening, I'm Kathy Lewis, and here's what matters tonight. Hurricane season is here, but we typically don't feel its effects until August or September. Still, emergency planners meet year-round to figure out what to do if the big one comes. Growing population, shrinking transportation dollars, and a short institutional memory are making their jobs a little harder. Lisa Godley sets the stage for us tonight with a look at how Hampton Roads gets ready for the season of storms.
Over the last decade, Hampton Roads witnessed Hurricanes Floyd and Isabel whip through our region, topple trees, pull down power lines, and push water in places we never expected. It gave us a newfound respect for the kind of damage these storms can do. But are we better prepared? Drivers we spoke with were hit and miss when it came to personal preparation.
Do you know what your evacuation route would be to get out of here?
No idea.
Which way would you get out of this area if you were asked to evacuate?
Probably take 64 and keep going up towards Richmond.
Now, do you have a hurricane preparedness kit ready?
I do not.
What's your evacuation route?
I don't know.
No idea?
Headed towards Richmond.
Tricia Chappell is a hurricane planner for the Virginia Department of Emergency Management. She says as a region, we're much better prepared than we used to be. By experiencing Isabel and later witnessing how Katrina devastated New Orleans, state and local governments have spent a lot of time and money developing new plans and enhancing old ones to make sure our needs are met.
It's a terrific challenge to everybody. Each of us needs to take a good look at our risks. What are our threats? And the best place to start is, where do you live? Are you in a flood zone? If you're in a surge zone or a flood zone, we certainly highly encourage folks to get flood insurance, not only on their structure, but also on their contents, because there's two different policies. Secondly, you've looked at your property. You have to look at the dynamics of your family. Do you have special needs folks within your household? Do you have pets?
Once all that's taken care of, if you need to evacuate the area, VDOT has installed more than 400 gates at the I-64 ramps. This will allow them to reverse the flow of traffic and move people out quicker. VDOT recently tested the gates at the Indian River Road exit off I-64.
We're anticipating having people out there 30 hours before the arrival of tropical storm force winds. We'll have the National Guard, State Police, and VDOT personnel and our subcontractors who assist us with the gate closure all out there at every single one of the gates.
Once the governor calls for a lane reversal, VDOT will begin to move people in place. The goal is to have the lanes reversed for 24 hours. After that, it will stop, and then the workers will move to safety before the storm arrives. By reversing traffic, more people can leave the area in a shorter amount of time. But don't be in a hurry.
The clearance times for Interstate 64 without using lane reversal is about 23 hours. If lane reversal is implemented, it cuts it down to 16 hours. However, Bowers Hill remains at 23 hours. That area on the south side, moving out through 58 and 460.
Another key element to ensure you're not sitting in traffic for half or even a whole day is to be ready to go as soon as the official word to evacuate Hampton Roads comes down. Chappell says the biggest mistake people make is waiting until they're told to evacuate before they fill up the tank, get cash from the ATM, or pack clothes and snacks. You can save yourself a lot of time and frustration by being ready to roll when you're told. For What Matters, I'm Lisa Godley.
All that water. And joining us tonight, Jim Talbot, who is an Assistant Director of Emergency Preparedness Response in Norfolk. He's the Assistant Director for Emergency Response. Stephanie Henshaw joins us as well. He's VDOT's Eastern Region Traffic Operations Manager. And we're also happy to have Chris Gunnifson with us tonight, who is the Director of Engineering here at WHRO. Good to have all of you with us tonight. Thank you for being here. I wonder, as Lisa talked about, and first Jim, Lisa talked about Hurricane Isabel. And I think a lot of us have the idea that Isabel was a hurricane, but you say technically it wasn't.
That's correct. In order to officially be a hurricane, you have to have 1 minute sustained winds of 75. The highest 1 minute sustained in Norfolk was at the Naval Air Station, and it was 58 miles per hour. Now, we did have some gusts, 75 to 80, but technically, it was not a hurricane. It was a strong tropical storm.
Which I think is interesting when you think about what it tells us about what a hurricane could be. I talked to so many people in the wake of Isabel who said, boy, after that, I'm not sticking around here for the next one.
And even though it was a strong tropical storm, according to the Hurricane Center, if it had been on slightly different track, about 25 miles east, the scenario would have been much different. Where the water level would have probably been 3 to 4 feet higher in the bay and in the harbor and all the rivers because of the surge coming in with it.
And so give us a sense of what that means. When you say 3 to 4 feet higher, what does that mean in terms of where that water winds up going?
The average elevation of the city of Norfolk is about 13 feet above mean sea level. The highest water level that we observed with Isabel in the Norfolk Harbor was 8 feet 4 inches. So had we seen the additional 3 to 4 feet, we're potentially getting water up now to a very large portion of the city. Now, we're not talking to the flooding where everybody has to evacuate, but we're talking the higher areas of the city getting a few inches and the lower areas getting many, many feet of water.
Interesting point. I wonder, Stephanie Henshaw, as you think about this issue of evacuation, and I just don't think anybody wants to have to do that if we can possibly avoid it. What do you do about the fact that, and you know this, on any given day in Hampton Roads, 1 or 2 bad accidents is going to tie up traffic throughout the region, and we don't have the opportunity for alternate routes like we used to, where if there was an accident at the bridge tunnel, you know, you could reasonably go somewhere else and get out. There's just too much volume now. So how do you envision this working when we have a storm bearing down on us, and I'm guessing people are going to be a little bit anxious?
Well, of course, it's an understatement to say that it's a challenge. It's a challenge getting around Hampton Roads on any workday, the peak hour period. We have a couple of tools that we plan to implement in the event that we have to effect a wide area evacuation. One are our safety service patrols, and they are out there on a normal workday, and they're our first line of defense, that we call them, for incident management.
Now, are they still going to be there? Because one of the things we know, and last week when those $538 million in transportation cuts were announced, they said they're going to stop a lot of those safety patrol programs, in addition to closing nearly half the rest stops. So are those safety patrols still going to be there?
Hampton Roads and Northern Virginia, our safety service patrol programs are still intact. They have been significantly reduced. In the case of an evacuation and widespread emergency, we'll have every single body, all hands on deck.
Yeah, I can
every single body that we can muster, we'll have them out there, and they'll have additional resources, additional gas and fuel and other supplies to aid motorists.
So figuring out who goes where is probably a function of where you live, right?
That's correct.
So give us some examples. Who's going out 264 and west, and who's going through the bridge tunnel?
Well, we use the major interstate highways as sort of a natural dividing point geographically. And if you live south of Interstate 264, for example, in the beach, we would like for you to take 264 to 64 out towards Bowers Hill and pick up 58 West. I-64 West is probably the most popular route, but it's not the only route. Yeah. And we want to use every available route out.
Boy, I tell you, you're right about that. I think there will be a lot of people who will be discovering Route 58 if the time comes, no question about it. Now, we know that for many years there was great difficulty in getting an agreement on the lane reversal business, but it sounds like that's really been well resolved. We have these gates at various interstate exits that will give us the capability to turn all but one lane of traffic out of town.
Right, right. And we have finalized the gate installation as of last hurricane season, and they will allow us to effect lane reversal in a much more efficient manner, and we don't have to deploy all the traffic control manually. The gates are already out there. We can deploy the manpower resources and close a gate in a matter of seconds, actually. And we practice that on an annual basis, so hopefully we'll never have to use it, but we're prepared.
One hopes. And the other thing I know you're practicing regularly, because that was one of the issues that was pointed up, is closing that Midtown tunnel.
Yes.
And so we do that very regularly now.
We test the floodgates at the Midtown tunnel 2 times every year, and we've just recently conducted a test. We also test them at the Hampton Roads Bridge Tunnel. They have them on both ends of each one of the Hampton Roads Bridge tunnels. And we have a test upcoming in a couple of weeks, as a matter of fact, testing those floodgates.
Chris Gunnifson is the head of engineering here at WHRO, and I think it's very interesting to look at the way that this company's response has evolved over the years.
Yeah, absolutely. With Isabel and the response we had before, and really the response from the media afterwards, we've really gotten involved. Before anybody here would be, there would be nobody here. Everybody would be gone. There may be a couple of people doing something, but that's people that live in low-lying areas and needed a place to stay. Now we don't have that. We're fully involved. We have a full EOC. We monitor every EOC.
Emergency Operations Center.
Emergency Operations Center. We monitor everybody's EOC. We can talk to anybody. It's a much more advanced
So if
system.
I understand it correctly, WHRO will be in many respects a conduit for that information to get out to the public on 89.5 WHRV.
Yeah, absolutely. What they're going to do is we're going to be monitoring that all the various EOCs, bringing that information in, and distributing the information that needs to go out to the public. Maybe not everything needs to go out, and if it's internal communications between EOCs, that's going to stay internal to the EOCs. Sure. But the information, ice, water, things after the storm, and the primary focus for us is because we got plenty of great news organizations in this market to cover the befores and durings. Our goal is after. When people started going back to regular programming, when people really needed that information of where to get ice, where to get water, stuff of that nature, that's when we're going to be there to give that information to them.
Jim Talbot, as you think about going back to Isabel and the lessons that were learned out of that, we note that was 6 years ago, and this community changes population quite frequently. So there certainly are people who remember Isabel, but the fact of the matter is there are new people coming in who don't have that institutional memory or that frame of reference. So how do you go about convincing them that they really do need to understand what their evacuation route will be and to have that emergency kit?
Well, the constant turnover of our population and the continual movement of people within the Tidewater area, because they're moving around even though they're here, it's very important for everyone to assess where they live, to determine if they are in an area that's prone to flooding, both from tidal flooding and rainfall flooding, to develop an emergency kit within their family unit, and to actually practice an evacuation scenario, determine where they're going to go in advance. Many people ask us, when should we take this event serious? We recommend that they look at our partners in the military. If the Navy is going to sortie ships, that's when they need to pull out those emergency plans, review them with their family, and say, the Navy's sending many of their resources out of the area, we need to consider the same thing.
Or just at least dust off the plan and take a look at it.
Correct, and determine in advance what they're going to do. And realize that if the localities or the state either puts out a recommended evacuation or mandatory evacuation, that is done with a lot of discussion throughout the region, and they really need to heed
that's
those.
A no-fooling deal.
That's correct. Yeah. They need to take that as a serious event.
The thing that is interesting to me to think about over time is that people's family circumstances change. People who perhaps were highly mobile in the last storm may not be as mobile now, may have some special needs. And I know that Lisa in her report talked about the need for people to complete these special needs reports.
And we're actually seeing a very big change in the special needs population, where many years ago, and even back in 2003 with Isabel, a lot of the special needs population were in identified sites like nursing homes, home for adults. Because of the insurance and HMOs now, more and more people are living independently in the city or out in the community, so there is a lot of special needs. There's some challenges with special needs. One is medication that people are on. They need to look at where they get that medication. If they're using a local neighborhood pharmacy that may be a mom and pop one-owned pharmacy, they need to contact their physician and the pharmacy and ask them to register that information with the national chain, because that one pharmacy may be out of commission, and maybe they've evacuated and they don't have access to their medication. So
it's an interesting
some
point.
of those areas that we've learned from the Katrina events
Well, Katrina and certainly Isabel last time, I remember being on the air and having people say, my mother is out of her diabetes insulin, my father needs this kind of medication. And we talk about that kit having 3-day supply, but I suspect when it comes to medication, you really want to be a little bit longer than that, which may require you to get in touch with your doctor and ask that. And of course, then there's the whole deal with insurance and whether they'll give you more than a 30-day supply, but that's another story for another day. But that was a very significant issue in the wake of Hurricane Katrina.
And we recommend that everybody contact their physician and the pharmacy and ask them the what-if scenarios.
Sure.
If something were to happen and I normally get a week's worth of medication, can I get a 2-week or 30-day supply?
Right.
And what do I need to do in advance to prepare for that?
The other thing we want to ask about, and we certainly don't want to think, and it would be very unlikely for us in this area to have a Hurricane Andrew style storm. I think most of our emergency plans are predicated on the assumption that the maximum storm is a 3 that we would probably get, remembering that Isabel was not a hurricane, a Category 3. But the truth of the matter is, I suppose a 4 or a 5 could come here, right?
It's not totally out of the question. I mean, Willoughby Spit, which historically supposedly was created by a hurricane, was very strong. And we can look back at past hurricanes like Gloria that passed us in '85, and it was a strong Category 3. So the possibility...
Just offshore.
Just offshore. But the possibility of us having an impact from a very strong event is there. Maybe not a Category 5, but a strong 3 or 4 would do major challenges for all of us.
When you say major challenges, I think you need to talk a little bit about what you mean by that, because I don't think people have a real sense of what that would mean. Let's say we get a 3.5 or a 4. What's Norfolk look like?
Well, we would have, first of all, we would have major flooding, and we would also have considerable, if not major, wind damage because of the building construction. Our building codes are 110 miles per hour. Category 3 is sustained at 110 miles per hour. So we're looking at that. And the challenge of emergency shelters and the after event, because let's say a lot of the population did evacuate, and then when they try to come back, their homes are damaged or destroyed, and we could get into a very large-scale shelter situation with the buildings we had left standing.
Which would be interesting because they might be underwater, right?
Potentially.
Yeah.
Well, we're not going to see the water with the longevity that was observed in New Orleans, because our makeup is different. The water will come in, we'll get flooding, it will recede, and many times as the storms move north of us, the wind direction changes and the tide drops below the average level. So I don't think we're going to see the prolonged flooding. It will come in, it will go out, and we will have some places that will be water soaked and waterlogged, but the potential of heavy damage throughout the area and just the return. See, Norfolk is a flow-through city. Let's say you live in Virginia Beach or Chesapeake and you evacuated to Richmond. You're trying to get back to the areas to our east and south, and you have to go through heavily devastated areas. So we have a flow-through problem of allowing people back into a devastated area, realizing that they don't want to stop in Norfolk. They want to go to continue on, maybe even on into North Carolina.
So that's why you all are meeting year-round with all of your colleagues throughout the region. That's one of the great, I think, regional success stories in this, I suspect, is the fact that you all really do meet very regularly and have very close relationships and cooperative agreements. We
actually meet twice a month, and if an event's pending, we meet more often than that.
Is that a change over time?
No, we started meeting twice a month after Hurricane Hugo, which affected South Carolina many years ago, because Norfolk sent a lot of people down to South Carolina to work, and we came back and we finalized what is now the Hampton Roads Emergency Management Committee, which at that time was meeting monthly, and now we meet twice a month with part of the Planning Commission. And then we have special meetings. We meet a lot.
Well, when you say you meet, what are you talking about in these meetings?
A lot of it is the logistics and the communication. When it comes to emergency planning, there is no individual jurisdiction. It is all done from a region. And we do a lot of the planning on a regional basis, where we're doing a phased evacuation or a phased reentry. And it takes a lot of planning and a lot of coordination.
It's a lot of moving parts.
There are no city boundaries or county boundaries when it comes to emergency planning.
And is there a point in the process at which that designation is made? In other words, you guys are all one unit now, start implementing your plan.
Yes. there is.
That's really interesting. Stephanie Henshaw, one of the things that I think we learned out of Hurricane Katrina was that not everybody has a car and not everybody is able to get out of town. And I know that certainly Norfolk has some arrangements to use the school buses to get people who are immobile out to Richmond. Do you have the sense that we're as prepared as we need to be on that particular issue, moving those populations on the highways that aren't mobile necessarily?
Well, the Department of Transportation is not directly connected to that particular issue. All the localities, as Jim was referring to earlier, they have their own plans for special needs populations. So we don't get directly involved in that. How does
the $538 million cut that the Commonwealth Transportation Board learned about a couple of weeks ago, how does that affect something like hurricane preparedness? I think most of us think about that in terms of the way it affects us in a rush hour scenario. But how does it affect you for emergency planning purposes?
Well, the most immediate impact has been the reduction of our Safety Service Patrol that I spoke about earlier. We won't have the numbers that we had last year, so we don't have the frequency of coverage by the individual patrols that we had last year. So we're going to have to augment that Safety Service Patrol staff, perhaps with some of our maintenance personnel who might be able to come in and fulfill the role of a Safety Service Patrol.
You know, Chris, it's an interesting point to look at the roles of people who will be involved in these efforts. And in order to do that, you know, you really have to, and I'm sure the same is true for the telephone company and for the electric utility and all the rest of it, you know, you really have to make plans for your own employees to get the employees that you need there.
Absolutely.
So that's been an interesting process.
It is, and we've gone through several layers and iterations, and, you know, we sent out a questionnaire to all our employees and said, hey, you know, are you going to be available or are you going to leave? You know, if you're going to leave, I need to know that now so I don't plan on you being here to fulfill it. And then when we start doing 24-hour newscast, it takes a lot of information to fill those airwaves, and there's going to be a lot of information out there to gather.
Yeah.
But we've got probably close to 70 people from our staff alone that are going to be here doing various shifts.
And I know we've tabletopped this. Are we going to get a real full-on dress rehearsal for this thing at some point?
We will. Actually, next month we will go into, you know, provided we don't get anything before then, but next month we have planned to do a full rehearsal. Similar to what we did last year. Last year was a kind of a smaller version of what we're going to do this year, but it's bringing everything back up, getting everybody used to sitting down and pulling up the individual localities, pulling up to the VDOT cameras, and you know, seeing what's out there, which ones are doing what. So it's
quite an enterprise.
It's an enterprise.
Well, let's just say I'm always glad to see you all, but I really hope we don't have to implement any of this. I hope this is all just good planning that we keep on the shelf and in case something happens.
Absolutely.
Thanks so much for being with us tonight.
Thank you.
Thank
and
you.
I'll be back in just a moment with a final thought. Thank goodness for those who've gone before us. The tragic victims of Hurricane Katrina taught us to round up our school buses and get less mobile residents to Richmond to ride out the storm. Hurricane Andrew actually bought us a few new residents. I know of at least one couple now living in one of Williamsburg's exceptional retirement communities because Andrew convinced them that they just could not ride out another storm like it in Miami. Even Isabel had its lessons. Here at your public broadcaster, we've learned during that storm what we might have figured out earlier, and that is what our role would be, but we learned it. Our commercial television colleagues do a terrific job of tracking the storms and bringing you the stories of damage and its aftermath. But we discovered in the midst of that storm that we had a different role, and it was one for the longer haul. Our news and public affairs radio station, WHRV, continued for at least a week after that storm to deliver information about where to get ice, how to get emergency medical help, and news about when the lights would be back on, most important perhaps of all. Since then, we have refined that plan, and as you've just heard, we're working with emergency planners across the Commonwealth to play an important role in recovery. We've done some basic testing, and we're gonna have a big old dress rehearsal coming up next month, so that's why it's terrific that we'll be taking more opportunities to take this plan off the table and put it into practice while the sky is still clear. And I hope we'll do that time and time again until we're sure that we have controlled everything we can in a circumstance that is inherently uncontrollable. Well, if you have a comment or a question about our broadcast, you can find us online at whatmatters.tv or on Facebook. You can also send your letters to What Matters, 5200 Hampton Boulevard in Norfolk, or you can call us at 889-9425. Here's a look at what's ahead in the weeks to come. There is a way of life that's defined this region for generations. Working the water is in the DNA of some families. We'll take a look at the life of watermen in Hampton Roads, as well as the health of the area's vital waterways. Also coming up, we'll bring you the stories of 4 individuals and 1 organization and show you how their work is truly making a difference here in Hampton Roads. Building hopes and building dreams, one house at a time. The area's Habitat for Humanity organization on the south side is not only changing lives for the better, it's also building community enrichment. We'll go back to the site of last year's Blitz build and see how things are going there. Here's a hint. They're going very well indeed. I hope you'll join us on our News and Public Affairs radio station 89.5 WHRV weekdays at noon for Hearsay. And thanks for watching. I'm Kathy Lewis. We'll see you next time for another look at What Matters.